Unit 6, The Days of Noah, Understanding the Context of the Flood. So in Matthew 24, verse 37, Jesus gives this interesting phrase. Now, the disciples come to him and they ask him about his second coming, and Jesus gives him this interesting response. He says, "But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be." Now, this is interesting, right? Because what do we know about the days of Noah? Well, if we go into Genesis 5, here's what we read in 5:28. So this is the end of the genealogy that we talked about in the previous unit. It says, Lamech, who's Noah's dad, lived 182 years, and he had a son, and he called his name Noah, saying, "This one will comfort us concerning our work." Remember how Noah's name was rest or comfort or consolation. "And the toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord has cursed." And then, there's another really important verse that we're going to see about Noah, and it's this one. Now, we're going to come back to this one, but I want to read it here just to kind of put it before you. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God, and Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay? So that's going to be a really key verse for our understanding. We'll come back to it in a second. But let's look at this idea of the days of Noah. So which I want to just give an overview of just kind of the events that surround the flood. So in Genesis 6, it says that there were giants on the earth and that men were exceedingly wicked. We're going to look at this in a little bit, okay? In verse 7, we learn that God is sorry that he's made man, and he decides that man needs to be destroyed. However, Noah is righteous, and God chooses to spare him and his family. So God commands Noah to build an ark, and he gives him all the specifications. That's in chapter 6, 13 to 22, and Noah obeys. In chapter 7, that's the account of the flood. So God floods the earth. Noah and his family and all the animals are safe in the ark. In chapters 8, verses 1 through 13, we talk about where the waters subside and the ark rests on Mount Ararat. And then the rest of chapter 8 through the end of chapter 9 is all about Noah's family and the animals. As they leave the ark, they begin to repopulate the earth, and that's when God makes a second covenant with Noah, which is basically, I will never flood the earth like that again. So that's kind of a quick summary of what happens, but a question that we need to answer is this one. Why did God choose to rescue Noah? Did he have to? I mean, he could have done lots of stuff. He could have just wiped out everybody and made another Adam like he did before, right? But he doesn't do that. What he does is he selects this man and his families. Noah. Why did God rescue Noah? Well, if we go back to our verse 9, reading it again, says, "This is the genealogy. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God, and Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth." And what's interesting about that little part is Noah is the only person whose genealogy is actually mentioned twice. Because if we go back to the very last verse of Genesis 5, so this is the end of the genealogy. It stops here. It stops in the middle of Noah's life, and it makes specific mention that Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begot Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then we go into the beginning of Genesis 6. So look at what it says. "Now it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. So at this point, man decrees that the strife between God and man, God is dealing with, and one of the ways is that he's going to shorten man's previously very long lifespans to no more than 120 years. And of course, nobody has lived past 120 years since then. But then we have this really weird verse, and this is verse 4. Now it says that there were giants on the earth in those days and also afterward. Okay, so 2 time periods are mentioned in this verse. Now I'm going to pause here right in the middle of Genesis 6:4, and I want to look at this word giants. So this word giants is the Hebrew word nephil, or the plural version is Nephilim, right? We see the M is always the plural, like seraphim, cherubim. This is Nephilim, right? Nephilim is the word giants. And what's interesting about this is that it only occurs 2 times in the whole Bible. Once here, right, talking about here, and again, it talks about it later. Now, these are not the same kind of giants, because these ones are going to get wiped out in the flood. But what's interesting is that this thing happens twice. So where is the second part? You can probably even think about it. Where is another mention of giants? Okay, it may not be what you think. You may be thinking, oh, Goliath. Well, that's actually a possibility, but this particular word isn't used of Goliath. But it is found in this verse. It says, "Now then we saw giants, the descendants of," in parentheses, "the descendants of Anak came from the giants," which is interesting. We'll get to that later. "And when we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." Now, this comes from Numbers 13. Now, we're going to get to this much later. But what's interesting is that in this verse, Genesis 6:4, it says that there were giants on the earth in those days and also afterward. And then it goes on and it finishes the verse. Now, this is interesting. It says, "When the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown." Let's go to the next verse. Verse 5, "Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man from whom I created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, and the birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them." And then we see two really interesting verses. Verse 8, "But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord." And there's this concept of the law of first mention, right? The first time something is mentioned in the Bible is significant for its meaning throughout the Bible. And this one is no exception. This is the first time this word grace shows up in the Bible. But Noah found grace. And we're going to see that that's also very significant for what happens next. But then we get to the verse that we looked at earlier. Now, this is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God, and he had his three sons, right? Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So you may be asking this very good question: what in the world is going on here? So what we want to do in the next unit, Unit 7, I want to talk about the idea of preserving the line. And you're like, what does that mean? Well, we'll talk about it in the next unit. But what we want to get to is the flood as an act of grace. So join me, if you would, in Unit 7.